The first question I would like to raise here is, how dangerous is climate change? Can it kill you? And the backdrop for this is, this had come up in a couple previous talks, where if there is a perception where, well, maybe this is happening, maybe this isn't, maybe this will, have some grave consequences at some point in the future, there's that a degree of attention and importance that can be given. And when someone were to speak of, this is serious, and people die because of this, for some individuals, this just seems like hyperbole and almost ridiculous. And so that's what we'd, I think, like to address today. And Professor Zdravchuk and myself, I think we'll be going back and forth. So as we speak, there are millions in Puerto Rico struggling for power. And that affects us in so many ways. And so if we were to look at the CDC, Center for Disease Control, not only is there the immediate risk of death, where obviously if winds are over 100 miles an hour, you have to worry about being hit by something, et cetera. But then there's all of these things that you might not think of, like not using a wet electrical device, down power lines. If you're running a generator, that carbon monoxide poisoning is an issue. And so some people die in hurricanes, not in the immediate strength of the storm, but in all of the hazards which happen afterwards. And so as we consider what do we need to worry about with health, obviously hurricanes are a major threat, and not only the immediate storm but also the aftermath. But also this edition not only shows the hurricane is a concern, but also there's this little banner for Zika. Now, climate change does not cause hurricanes, nor does it cause diseases. But the warmer waters allow hurricanes to form more frequently, become stronger, travel differently. Maybe in the case of Harvey, spend more time dumping water in one area. And then the same would apply here for Zika. All right, so that if we were to consider, I'll just show this one article from the Virgin Islands and another one from Texas in a second. Prior to the hurricanes, Zika was a concern in the Virgin Islands, and the CDC was publishing reports, which you can access here, where Zika is causing birth defects in the United States. Now, then the question is, if this was an issue before the hurricane, what do you think happens when the Virgin Islands then looks like this? Do you think this is a scenario where mosquito-borne illnesses will become more prevalent or less prevalent? All right, and so just like hurricanes, where climate change is not causing hurricanes, but it can make them more frequent, more intense, allow them to draw more water. And so when we look at the number of people affected by hurricanes, which would include danger and threat to life, that would increase, then the same would apply to then Zika. Here in Puerto Rico, do you think that the conditions under which mosquito-borne illnesses can spread, do you think these are made better or worse by extreme events which climate change exaggerates? The same thing here is an article from Texas about Zika. Once again, the miscarriages and birth defects that could be caused by this virus, clearly a threat. That was before the hurricane. What do we think about the aftermath of the hurricane? And so some people would have suffered from whether it be extreme weather events or disease in any case. But as climate change makes extreme weather events more common and more severe, more and more people will undoubtedly suffer. Now, when I look at the leading causes of death, whether it be in the United States or the world, one thing I'd like to start off with is high blood pressure isn't on this list. All right? We don't see high blood pressure. High blood pressure tends not to kill. What high blood pressure does is it makes then other things worse. All right, so the risk of, say, heart attack or stroke. If you suffer from high blood pressure, that's one of the factors causing that. If you look on the death certificate, would high blood pressure be there? No, it would be the heart attack, it would be the stroke, but high blood pressure was a contributing cause. And in the same way here, when we look at the cause of death, is climate change here? It is not. All right, so heart disease, stroke, respiratory issues, we'll get to diarrhea later. These are major causes of death. But just like high blood pressure, climate change can contribute to these. So climate change wasn't causing any of those deaths directly. It was heart attack or stroke or asthma. All right, but if you were to simply do a search in the literature, and once again, as college students, you're encouraged not to listen to your instructors, not to listen to someone who's giving a talk or something that you read online. You know, you're critical thinkers. All right, and so you gather data for yourself and you make conclusions. And so as college students, you have access to, millions of scientific journal articles. You can go into our databases and type in keywords like climate change and then type in keywords like heart attack and ask, does this play a role? And if you were to do that, you would come up with scientific journal articles. Once again, in this age of information where there's different sources and they have different qualities, and sometimes some would recommend alternate conclusions. You, once again, as a critical thinker, don't have to base what you think on the conclusions of others. You can make your own conclusions from data. And so in less than a minute, you could go into our college database and come up with data answering the question, does climate change seem to impact heart disease? And if you were to look at the effects of heat waves and higher temperatures on cardiac arrest, you can see that there's a clear relation with this bar being the norm. All right, if you were to look, many of these will, be review articles which review data from many areas. Many will be specific for one region. So, for example, this one coming from Atlanta. But once again, the risk of visits to the emergency room clearly go up in warmer temperatures. The risk of cardiac problems during labor increases with warmer temperatures. I'm not going to use any one set of statistics and say this is the level or this is the rate, but I'd like to just read this from this review article, which is reviewing many papers which you could then investigate individually. A 3% increase in death rates per 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature in all cause mortality for the hot regions, and that goes from one paper. A second paper, each 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase in the mean daily temperature corresponds to a 2.6% increase in cardiovascular mortality in North America. A third paper, increased mortality during heat waves has been attributed mainly to this, etc. So the question then becomes, if you were to ask, can climate change kill you? The answer is clearly yes, that more people die when there is extreme weather, whether this be hurricanes or whether this be heat waves. All right, in warmer temperatures, certain events like heart attack and stroke, which are among the top 10 causes of death in both the United States and the world, they increase. Now, a lot of the students here, you're going into allied health programs. All right, so if you are working as a nurse, an EMT, in rad tech, during a heat wave, all right, the people running the hospital, they are well aware of this, and more people are called in. All right, it is, a well-known fact that, you look at the weather forecast and you say, these next 3 days are going to be bad. We're going to need extra staff. And as we see more and more of these heat waves because of climate change, heart attack and stroke rates will go up. People will have heart attacks and strokes who would not have had the weather been more typical. And on that list that I showed you, respiratory events were there. Well, the warmer the weather, the more likely that asthma attacks and other respiratory illnesses manifest for a number of reasons. One is that pollen goes up. All right, and so if you were to measure as we get into warmer weather, all right, so for each of these, this is a type of plant. This is kind of, average to below average temperature up to the most extreme event. As the temperature goes up, the amount of pollen from this plant goes up in the air. From this plant goes up in the air. From this plant goes up in the air. So pollen increases with temperature, and therefore so can asthma attacks. Now, that is in general a conclusion. All right, but we are very lucky to live in a country where we do care for our environment. There are very rigid clean air laws. Imagine if you lived here, or here, or here. So what I said is true for anyone. All right, but if you are living in an area which is polluted, it is so much more the case. And so real quick, before I pass it all to Dr. Z, I'd like to just say that, this is true for everyone, but there are some who are at a far greater risk of the negative effects of climate change than are the people in this room. So one region in New Delhi has more than 29,000 people per square kilometer. That's the size of Middletown's Ock campus. Imagine that in an area the size of Ock's campus, 29,000 people were living here. Now imagine the effects of severe weather. Now imagine the effects of a heat wave. It's far, far worse. And once again, this is not something which is not known. As climate change occurs and increases more severe weather, there are just devastating impacts on individuals who are living in areas which are more densely populated, where the clean air and clean water are more of an issue. So once again, not to come up with statistics that this is the conclusion, but if you were to review some of this data, more than 3 million children under the age of 5 die each year because of environmental related diseases. So something in the environment has contributed to them dying prior to when they normally would have, which prevents them from leading a normal life. And much of this is made worse by climate change, whether it be extreme weather, extreme drought. Very often in drought, you have to move. And when you are now leaving your home, traveling miles, and now you're a climate refugee, going into, a crowded urban setting because there are some jobs there, this is where mortality typically increases. Once again, you should not take my word for this. You shouldn't take anyone's word for this. You as, college students, you should investigate this on your own. And you should go to the World Health Organization and find, what they have found about the effects of climate change on mortality. All right, and so there is certainly a lot of information out there. All right, and so as we are concerned for ourselves, as we are concerned for those we share the planet with, as we prepare to go into fields of allied health, as many of you are, then this should interest you. It impacts your livelihood and the care that you will be given. All right, so here's an important question. And once again, please don't rely on anything that I say. You have all the tools at OCK to research this on your own. But climate change is a major cause of death already. All right, one paper I read, each paper can come up with its own estimate, but estimates that in a given year, 300,000 people die earlier than they otherwise would have because of the changes in climate change. All right. Now, whether that number is on or whether this will change, et cetera, the point is that climate change can kill. Right? And there are so many different facets of this. Here to present, another facet is Dr. Z.